The story of Samson begins in one of the darkest periods of Israel's history. For 40 years, the Philistines had oppressed the Israelites, crushing their spirit and imposing their pagan ways. It was a time of despair, a result of Israel's repeated disobedience to God. Yet even in their rebellion, God did not abandon his people. He was preparing a deliverer to begin the journey of their redemption. In the small village of Zorah, nestled in the land of the tribe of Dan, lived a couple who were righteous yet sorrowful. Manoah and his wife longed for a child, but she was barren. In those days, barrenness was seen as a curse, and the couple's quiet prayers for a child often seemed unanswered. One day, as Manoah's wife worked in the fields, a figure appeared before her. His presence was unlike anything she had ever seen, a man radiant and glorious, with a voice that carried divine authority. "You are barren," he said, "but you shall conceive and bear a son. This child will be a Nazirite, consecrated to God from birth. No razor shall touch his head, for he is chosen to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines." Overwhelmed, she ran to tell her husband. Manoah, shaken yet hopeful, prayed fervently, "Lord, let the man of God come again and teach us how to raise the boy you have promised." God heard his prayer. The angel of the Lord appeared again, and Manoah asked, trembling, "What is the boy's way of life and mission?" The angel replied, "Your wife must observe everything I have commanded. The boy will be set apart for God's work." Manoah prepared an offering in gratitude. As the flames rose from the altar, the angel ascended in the fire, disappearing into the heavens. Manoah fell to the ground in awe, realizing they had been in the presence of God. In time, Manoah's wife bore a son and named him Samson, meaning, "like the sun." The boy grew strong, and the Spirit of the Lord stirred within him, marking him for a great purpose. As Samson grew, his extraordinary strength became evident. However, with his great power came an impulsive and unpredictable nature. Samson was not only physically strong, but also headstrong, driven by his passions and desires. One day, Samson traveled to Timnah, a Philistine city. There he saw a young Philistine woman who captivated him. Returning home, he told his parents, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Get her for me as my wife." His parents were dismayed. "Must you marry a Philistine? Is there no woman among our people?" they pleaded. But Samson was adamant. "She pleases me," he said. Unbeknownst to them, this was part of God's plan to create conflict with the Philistines. As he journeyed to Timnah to arrange the marriage, Samson walked through the vineyards. Suddenly, a lion leaped out at him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson mightily, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, leaving its carcass by the roadside. Days later, passing the same spot, Samson noticed that bees had made a hive in the lion's carcass. Reaching in, he scooped out honey and ate it, sharing it with his parents, though he did not tell them where it came from. The wedding riddle. At his wedding feast, Samson was surrounded by 30 Philistine men. Fueled by mischief and his recent experience, he posed a riddle to the guests. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Solve it within 7 days, and I will give you 30 sets of clothing. Fail, and you must give me 30. For days, the Philistines tried to solve the riddle, but they could not. Growing desperate, they cornered Samson's bride and threatened her. "Coax your husband into revealing the answer," they said, "or we will burn you and your father's household." Terrified, she pleaded with Samson, weeping incessantly. Day after day, she wore him down until, on the 7th day, he relented and told her the answer. Armed with this knowledge, the Philistines triumphantly declared, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson, realizing their treachery, exclaimed, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Enraged, he left the feast, traveled to Ashkelon, and killed 30 Philistines to pay the wager. Still fuming, he abandoned his bride and returned to his father's house. Vengeance and the foxes. When Samson later returned to reconcile with his bride, he discovered that she had been given to another man. Her father, seeing Samson's anger, hastily offered her younger sister instead. But this only fueled Samson's fury. This time, he vowed, "I have a right to harm the Philistines." In a cunning act of vengeance, Samson caught 300 foxes tied their tails together in pairs, and fastened torches to them. He released the foxes into the Philistines' fields, burning their grain, vineyards, and olive groves. The destruction was catastrophic. The Philistines retaliated savagely, killing Samson's wife and her father. In response, Samson struck down many Philistines before retreating to a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines pursued him, demanding that the Israelites hand over Samson. Fearing reprisal, 3,000 men of Judah confronted him. "Don't you realize the Philistines rule over us?" they pleaded. Samson agreed to be bound and handed over, but his confidence in God's power remained unshaken. As the Philistines approached, shouting in triumph, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. He snapped the ropes like threads, seized the jawbone of a donkey, and unleashed his wrath, killing 1,000 men. The seduction of Delilah. Years passed, and Samson continued to judge Israel. His victories over the Philistines grew in number, but so did his weaknesses. His vulnerability to Philistine women would ultimately lead to his downfall. In the valley of Sorek, he fell in love with Delilah, a woman as cunning as she was beautiful. The Philistine leaders saw an opportunity and offered her an enormous bribe, 1,100 pieces of silver from each leader, if she could discover the secret of Samson's strength. Delilah began her relentless seduction. "Tell me the secret of your great strength," she whispered. Amused, Samson lied. "If I am bound with fresh bowstrings, I will be weak." Delilah tried it, but when the Philistines ambushed him, Samson broke free easily. She pressed him again and again, but he continued to deceive her. Finally, after days of incessant nagging, Samson revealed the truth. "My strength lies in my hair. If it is shaved, I will become weak." That night, as Samson slept on her lap, Delilah called a man to shave his head. When the Philistines captured him, his strength had departed. They gouged out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Gaza, where he was imprisoned and forced to grind grain. Samson's redemption. In prison, Samson's hair began to grow again, a sign of God's enduring grace. The Philistines, unaware of its significance, continued to mock him. One day, during a grand festival to honor their god, Dagon, the Philistines brought Samson to the temple to entertain them. The temple was packed with leaders and spectators, over 3,000 people on the roof alone. Blinded and shackled, Samson was led to the central pillars by a young boy. "Place my hands on the pillars," he said, "so I can lean against them." In his final act of faith, Samson prayed, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Strengthen me just once more, that I may take vengeance on the Philistines from my eyes." Summoning all his strength, Samson pushed against the pillars. "Let me die with the Philistines," he cried. The temple collapsed, killing everyone inside, including Samson. In his death, Samson struck a greater blow against the Philistines than he had in his life. His family retrieved his body and buried him in the tomb of his father, Manoah. A legacy of strength and weakness. Samson's life was a profound paradox, defined by incredible strength yet deep personal flaws. Born with a divine purpose, he was set apart as a Nazirite, dedicated to God with specific vows meant to guide his life. His physical power was unmatched. He tore apart lions, defeated armies, and performed feats that seemed to defy human limits. However, his inner weakness, particularly his susceptibility to temptation, ultimately led to his downfall. His relationships with women like Delilah, driven by desire rather than divine purpose, became his greatest vulnerability. Samson's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of self-indulgence and losing sight of one's divine calling. His disregard for the Nazirite vows and his impulsive actions weakened him, leading to his capture and humiliation. Yet even in his darkest moment, when he was blinded and imprisoned, redemption was still possible. Samson called upon God for strength one last time, and in his final act, he brought down the Philistine rulers, sacrificing himself in the process. Samson's life shows that, even through failure, God's plan can prevail. It's a reminder that true strength lies in aligning with God's purpose, resisting temptations, and seeking redemption, no matter how far one has fallen. Like, subscribe, and share for more inspiring stories.